The first time I grabbed Elisa hard enough to leave 4 faint fingerprints on her arm. The power in our building had been out for 11 minutes. The apartment had climbed to a temperature I can only describe as biblical. And I was moving through a hallway I'd walked 1,000 times before in the dark. Except this time, I miscalculated by exactly 1 roommate. My name is Jonas Ferreira. I sell other people's houses for a living, which apparently qualifies me to tackle my own roommate like I'm trying out for a linebacker spot on a team nobody drafted me for. She didn't fall. She laughed instead. Low, surprised, the kind of laugh that lands somewhere behind your ribs, and said, "Grab me like that more often." And I stood there in the pitch black holding her arm 2 full seconds longer than any lease agreement would consider appropriate, thinking, well, that's new. I told myself it was adrenaline. I have told myself worse lies and believed them longer. This one didn't survive until sunrise. Some context, because I promise this isn't usually how my nights go. I'm 32. I sell real estate on the north side of Chicago, mostly 2 flats and the occasional overpriced Logan Square condo with character, which is industry code for a bathroom you'll want to renovate before your in-laws visit. I'm good at it. In the specific way that people who are good at reading other people's houses are often terrible at reading their own lives. I can walk into a place and tell you in 4 seconds whether the previous owners were happy there. Something about how light falls into a kitchen that's been used versus a kitchen that's just been kept. I also carry, out of professional habit, a battered little laser distance measurer in my bag at all times, the same one for 6 years. Chipped along one edge, $12 to replace, and absurdly sentimental for a piece of plastic. You can't stage a room you haven't measured. Somewhere along the way, it became the thing I reach for when I don't trust my own read on a space. I've measured maybe 400 apartments that weren't mine. I had never once measured this one, which, in retrospect, might have been the whole problem. Rachel said something like that to me once, not cruelly. More like she was reading it off an inspection report. We'd been together 3 years. She left 14 months ago for a curatorial fellowship in Marfa, Texas, a genuinely good opportunity she deserved, and that I encouraged her to take. Because that is what a supportive partner does, and also because some coward part of me suspected that if I made it painless enough, I wouldn't have to find out what it looked like when someone fought to stay. She hugged me in the doorway of this exact apartment, cried a little, meant it, and said, "You made it so effortless to leave that I never had to earn the right to stay." Then she left, and she wasn't wrong. And I have spent 14 months turning that sentence over like a stone in my pocket, checking if it's still sharp. It is. I don't say any of this on dates. I say it to no one, generally, except occasionally to my mother, who has taken to leaving voicemails that begin with, "When you're ready," as though readiness is a light switch. I handle most emotional weather the way I handle a bad inspection report. Name the problem, note it politely, move on before anyone can ask how I feel about the foundation. After Rachel left, the rent on this place stopped making sense for one income. And a client of mine, sweet woman, terrible taste in flooring, mentioned her cousin needed somewhere to live after a lease fell through. That's how Elisa Marsh ended up on the other side of a shared bathroom 10 months ago. Not romance, not fate. Just Chicago rent and a mutual friend with opinions about hardwood. We had rules from day one, the kind 2 adults draft with straight faces because we both, independently, had recent history that made straight faces necessary. No borrowing each other's cars without asking. No dishes in the sink past 48 hours. And this one was mine. offered up like I was doing us both a favor. No making the lease weird. She'd laughed when I said it. Very romantic, she'd said. Very Jonas. I hadn't understood yet that she meant it as an insult. Here's what I knew about Elisa Marsh before that night, none of which I'll pretend was gathered neutrally. She's 27, a dentist 2 years into her own practice on Milwaukee Avenue, which means she spends her days telling strangers to floss and her evenings not flossing. A hypocrisy she owns with real pride. She has a laugh that starts as a single surprised exhale before it fully commits, like it's checking the room is safe first. She dances badly and without irony whenever she does dishes, always in socked feet, always to whatever terrible pop song her algorithm has decided defines her. She keeps a molded plastic molar on her desk that she uses as a stress ball, squeezing it absent-mindedly during phone calls the way other people click pens. When she's nervous about something, a hard patient, a bill she doesn't want to open, she chews the cap off a pen until it's basically gone, loses the pen, buys more pens, and the cycle continues. And I have never once told her I find this specific brand of chaos unreasonably endearing. She has a habit of standing in doorways instead of committing to a room, one shoulder against the frame, like she's still deciding if she's staying. I used to think that was indecision. I've come to think it's the opposite. She doesn't enter a space until she means it. I noticed things. I noticed the constellation of small scars across her knuckles from dental school, and a stubborn refusal to wear gloves during a woodworking phase she still won't discuss. I noticed she took her coffee black except when she was tired, and then she'd load it with sugar like she was trying to bribe the morning into being kinder. I noticed the specific, deliberate way she'd bump her shoulder into mine when we watched something funny, not accidental, not quite intentional either, just present. I filed all of it under roommate observations, the way you'd file a listing you have no intention of showing. Sure, I wasn't blind. I was, however, extremely committed to the bit that we were just roommates. A performance so convincing I nearly fooled myself into an award nomination. She became a dentist, she told me once, because of a chipped front tooth at age 9, and a pediatric dentist who talked to her like a person instead of a set of problems to be fixed. And she's apparently spent her entire adult life trying to be that specific kind of gentle with strangers who are afraid of her chair. She keeps a shoebox of thank you cards from patients in her closet that she'll deny the existence of if asked directly. She calls her mother every Sunday at exactly 11. No exceptions. A ritual I only ever heard one side of through the shared wall. Her voice going warmer and more patient than with anyone else, which told me things about her long before she ever told me anything herself. She is, by her own account, a terrible cook who makes exactly one dish. A garlic pasta she calls emergency spaghetti. With a competence so specific and so at odds with everything else in her kitchen behavior that I've come to suspect it's less a recipe and more a small act of self-preservation she learned somewhere and never let go of. We'd built our particular closeness in the unglamorous, accidental way roommates do. Arguing over whose turn it was to buy toilet paper, developing a running commentary for bad television that only makes sense to the two of us. Learning that she cries during dog food commercials and that I apparently narrate real estate listings in my sleep. A fact she has never once let me forget. Usually at moments specifically designed to be as humiliating as possible. There was a night in February when her practice lost a longtime patient, an elderly man she'd treated for 6 years, and she came home and didn't say anything, just sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets. I sat down next to her without asking questions, and we stayed there for 40 minutes while she didn't talk. And when she finally did, all she said was, "Thanks for not making me explain it." and something in my chest did something I didn't have a real estate metaphor for. That's the kind of closeness we had going into that July. Comfortable, load-bearing, extremely, deliberately, insistently platonic, at least on paper. The way a house can be listed as is and still have good bones nobody's mentioning out loud. The heat wave that week had broken records the local news was thrilled about. In that specific way, local news gets thrilled about disaster. 98 degrees at 8 p.m. The kind of heat that makes the whole city sound different, slower, like even the traffic is too tired to honk properly. Our building, a 100-year-old 3-flat with character, again, industry code, has no central air. Just window units groaning under the strain of every apartment running them at once. Which is exactly what happened around 10 that night. A building-wide brownout, then total blackout. The kind of dark that has weight to it. I heard Elisa's voice from the hallway, some combination of a curse word and a laugh. Because that's how she processes minor disaster, and went to find her using nothing but memory, and the vague hope neither of us had left anything sharp on the floor. That's the 11 minutes. That's the hallway. That's the arm. Afterward, once the flashlight on my phone confirmed we were both intact, we stood there a second too long in that new, humming kind of quiet a building gets when it loses power. No fridge hum, no traffic through closed windows, just two people breathing in a hot, dark hallway, close enough that I caught the clean citrus of her shampoo, and registered unhelpfully that my hand was still loosely around her arm. "You can let go?" she said, not moving. "Right, yes." I didn't immediately. Then I did, with the exaggerated care of a man disarming something. We called the landlord, a man named Kowalski, who does not believe in voicemail boxes that fill up, and got nothing. We checked the breaker panel with my flashlight and confirmed, professionally, that neither of us has any idea what we're looking at when we look at a breaker panel. The apartment kept climbing, 84 degrees inside by the time we gave up fixing anything and started negotiating survival instead. "Fire escape," she said. "I'll get ice. You get anything that isn't wine that got left in a hot car once." That's one specific bottle, and it was one time. It was memorable. That's the moment the night stopped being an inconvenience and started being something else. Though I wouldn't have admitted that yet. Not even to the mirror. We ended up on the fire escape outside the kitchen window 20 minutes later. Two folding chairs that had migrated there over the winter and never migrated back. A battery-powered fan angled uselessly at both of us. A grocery bag of gas station ice already sweating through itself, and the entire sky over Chicago strangely, generously clear, stars visible in a way they usually aren't through all that light pollution, like the blackout had temporarily returned something to us. We drank cheap white wine out of mismatched mugs because every actual wine glass had somehow migrated into a box labeled Kitchen Misk that neither of us could locate in the dark. And we talked, the way you talk when the usual social scaffolding, a schedule, a task, an excuse to leave the room, has been removed by an act of the power grid. "You know," she said, resting her socked feet on the railing like it was the most natural thing in the world. "For a man who sells houses, you have shockingly little furniture." "I have exactly enough furniture." "You have a couch, a bed, and one plant you've named and refuse to discuss." "Steve is not up for discussion." "Steve," she repeated, delighted, and that single exhale laugh arrived on schedule. "You named a fern Steve." He looked like a Steve. "Nothing looks like a Steve, Jonas. That's not how names work." She said my name like she was testing whether it still fit me, which, given the night we were having, might not have been an accident. When she laughed for real, not the polite version, her whole face committed to it, and her knee, bare below cut-off shorts, ended up pressed against mine on the narrow shared step, and neither of us moved it. It just stayed there, warm and specific, a fact neither of us was going to bring up out loud. At some point, mid-argument about who had squatter's rights to the good folding chair, I pulled the laser measurer out of my back pocket, pure nervous habit, and pointed the little red dot at the fire escape grating between our feet. "Did you just measure the distance between us?" she said. Occupational hazard. That's the least subtle flirting I've ever watched a grown man do with a hardware tool. It's called subtlety. We're roommates. Subtlety is legally required. She laughed hard enough to nearly tip the ice bag over the railing, and I pocketed the measurer feeling for the first time in longer than I could place. Like maybe I didn't need it to tell me anything about this particular room. We talked about nothing important for a while, in the comfortable shorthand of two people who'd spent 10 months building one. She told me about a patient that week who tried to negotiate his cavity count down like it was a used car. I told her about a showing that afternoon where the sellers had, mysteriously, left every closet stuffed to capacity, as if hiding evidence. And I'd had to improvise commentary about generous storage, while quietly recalculating what that generosity said about their entire marriage. She laughed at that one hard enough to nearly tip her mug, too. "You should write a memoir," she said. "Things closets told me." Working title? I like it. I want 10%. You get 0%, but I'll dedicate a chapter to you. Which chapter? The one about load-bearing walls, I said. And she went quiet for half a second in a way that made me wonder if she'd heard the sentence underneath the sentence. And then she laughed again and said, "That's either a compliment or a threat." And I said, "It's architecture." And she said, "Everything's architecture with you." Which is unfortunately true, and which she had apparently been keeping a private tally of. "Can I ask you something real?" she said, after a stretch of comfortable quiet, the fan doing nothing useful except making noise. "Why real estate?" "You've never once told me the actual reason, just the funny version." "My dad did it, before me. Small operation, mostly out on the south suburbs, mostly houses nobody else wanted to touch." I turned my mug in my hands, not quite looking at her. He used to take me on walkthroughs on weekends, and he had this thing he'd say in every single house, no matter how bad it looked. Water damage, bad wiring, whatever. He'd stand in the worst room and say, "Every house is telling you what it needs, if you're willing to listen instead of just looking." I thought it was a sales technique for about a decade. Took me embarrassingly long to realize he wasn't only talking about houses. Is he still? He passed when I was 26. Heart thing, fast, no warning. I said it the way I say most difficult facts. Cleanly, efficiently, no room left over for anyone to worry about me. I got the license 2 years later. Told myself it was a coincidence. She didn't offer the sympathetic noises people usually offer, the ones that always make me feel like I've handed someone a burden instead of a fact. She just said, "So you've spent your whole career listening to what houses need," and let the sentence sit there long enough that I understood exactly what she meant by it, and didn't have an answer, and didn't need one yet. "Your turn," I said, mostly to get out from under my own sentence. "Tell me something you've never told me the actual version of." I was supposed to specialize. Oral surgery, actually. I did 2 years of the track before I switched. She picked at the label on the wine bottle, working it loose in one long, unbroken strip, a nervous habit I filed away with the others. Everyone in my program thought I was insane. Surgery pays more, it's more prestigious, all of that. But I did a rotation at a general practice in my 3rd year. And there was this one afternoon, a kid, maybe 7, absolutely terrified. And I got him through a filling by making dumb jokes and letting him hold the suction thing, and he high-fived me on the way out like I'd done something heroic instead of just, existing calmly in a room with a scared kid for 20 minutes. And I thought, I don't want to fix the worst-case scenarios. I want to be the version of care that stops people from needing the worst-case scenario in the first place. She shrugged, like she was embarrassed by her own sincerity. So, prevention over heroics. Everyone thought I was wasting a good surgical hand. I don't think you were wasting anything. I know. I like my life. She looked at me sideways, something almost shy in it, which didn't fit her at all and fit her completely. I like this specific apartment in it, actually, more than I've told you, which is probably obvious now, given the whole evening. I'm aware. I have a professional eye for undisclosed feelings about real estate. You're aware of nothing. You named a fern Steve. Steve is thriving. Steve is not the problem here. The ice kept melting faster than either of us wanted to deal with, and at some point she reached into the bag for another cube and pressed it, without asking, to the back of my neck, her fingers cold and startlingly gentle against my skin. And I went very still in a way I hoped read as composed and almost certainly did not. You looked like you were overheating, she said, not moving her hand for a beat longer than the ice required. I was. For the record, that's not a euphemism. It's 98 degrees. I didn't say anything. Your face said something. We kept talking, as the sky went from navy to something closer to true black. Blackout dark, stars doing their rare Chicago performance overhead. I told her, more honestly than I meant to, about the specific shame of being a person who's good at reading a room's potential and terrible at claiming any of it for himself. That I could walk clients through a fixer-upper and see exactly what it could become, but couldn't apply the same imagination to my own life, which had been sitting on the market, so to speak, for 14 months without so much as an open house. Is that a real estate metaphor about your love life? She said. Or are we just doing bits now? Bits the safer read. Fine. What's the honest read? I looked at her in the almost dark, close enough to catch the shape of her mouth even without real light, and felt a sentence sitting right at the back of my teeth, ready to be said and completely unauthorized to leave. The honest read, I said, is that I've been telling myself this is temporary for 10 months, and I'm starting to think I was staging the story so I wouldn't have to sell it to myself. She didn't say anything for a second. Her thumb moved, absent, unconscious probably, along the rim of her mug, and I watched it like it was the most interesting thing that had ever happened on a fire escape in the history of Cook County. Jonas. Yeah. We had a rule. I remember the rule. I wrote the rule. No making the lease weird, she said. And it wasn't a rejection, exactly. Her knee was still against mine. Her voice had gone soft instead of sharp. It was more like she was naming the fence before either of us tried to climb it, giving us both one last honest look at what we'd be breaking if we kept going. I'm aware, I said. I wrote a very good rule. Airtight, no loopholes. None. I'm just saying, hypothetically, if a person were to grab another person hard enough to leave marks in the dark during a blackout, that was an accident. Was it? I said. And she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. something unguarded underneath the usual quick wit. And for one full, suspended, humid Chicago second, I thought the whole fence was about to come down. Her eyes dropped, quick, barely there, to my mouth and back up, and it ruined me a little, the speed of it, the fact that it happened at all. Then her phone lit up on the fire escape floor between us. The outage had apparently only killed the Wi-Fi, not the cell towers. Her mother calling, the ringtone she'd assigned specifically so she'd know to brace herself. She swore softly, answered out of decades of trained obligation. And the moment folded itself back up like a listing pulled off the market at the last second. I sat there while she paced the length of the fire escape in socked feet, murmuring reassurances about the blackout, her practice, whether she was eating enough vegetables, and I had 4 uninterrupted minutes to sit with the very inconvenient discovery that I had almost kissed my roommate during a citywide blackout, and that no part of me currently regretted it, which was, itself, deeply alarming. When she hung up, she didn't sit back down right away. She stood at the railing with her back to me, watching the city slowly, patchily get its power back. You could see it moving in blocks, whole streets blinking to life in the distance like a wave rolling toward us. And she said, without turning around, "This is a bad idea." "Extremely," I agreed. "You're my roommate." "I am." "You wrote a rule about this specific thing." I did. I was very proud of that rule. "So we should go inside," she said, "and pretend the last 20 minutes didn't happen and be normal, and let the fence be a fence." "We could," I said. "Do you want to?" She turned around then, mug still in one hand, hair sticking slightly to her neck in the heat, and looked at me for a long moment that had nothing performative in it at all. "No," she said. "That's the whole problem. I want to tell you I said something devastating and perfect in response. What I actually did was laugh, once, helplessly. The specific laugh of a man watching a very carefully built fence fall down in real time and finding, against all expectation, that he was relieved. "Okay," I said. "Then we don't." Power came back to our block 4 minutes later. You could hear it before you saw it. The fridge kicking on inside with a hum like a held breath being let out. And instead of ending the moment, it somehow made it worse. Because now there was light again, spilling through the kitchen window onto the fire escape, and neither of us reached for the switch to make it dimmer, and neither of us went inside. "So," she said. "So," I said. "The rule?" "I'm reconsidering the rule." "You wrote it in pen." "I have several pens. I can write a new one." We went inside sometime near midnight, not because the fire escape had stopped being the best place in Chicago, but because the mosquitoes had found us, and no version of romantic tension survives a determined mosquito. The apartment was fully lit, the air conditioner groaning back into its rhythm, and it should have broken the spell completely. But the ordinary light somehow made it worse, because there was nowhere left to blame it on the dark. We ended up on the couch, an appropriate distance apart that neither of us maintained for more than 4 minutes. Her feet eventually tucked under her, one shoulder finding my arm in the specific way I'd cataloged and pretended not to catalog for 10 months. "Can I tell you something humiliating?" she said. "Always. I applied for this apartment because of you." I turned to look at her properly. "You applied because your cousin knew my client." "My cousin knew your client. I looked you up before I ever emailed you back. I have a policy about who I live with, and it involved a moderate amount of light internet research. And somewhere in that research, I found your work Instagram. where you write captions about closets like you're narrating a nature documentary. And I thought, that man is either deeply unwell or exactly my type of unwell, and I needed to find out which. She said it fast, in one breath, the pace of a confession that's been rehearsed silently many times and is finally getting air. And then I moved in, and you were normal and nice and made excellent rules about the lease. And I told myself it was a crush that would burn off in a month like a bad houseplant purchase. It's been 10 months, Jonas. I am extremely bad at burning things off. I sat with that, feeling something in my chest do a slow, careful rearrangement, the kind you do to furniture when you're trying to see if a room could work differently than you assumed. I've wanted to say something since probably March, I admitted. I told myself the timing was bad and the lease was a problem, and you deserved someone who wasn't still. I stopped. Still what? Still recovering from being someone's effortless exit, I said, rougher than I meant it. My ex had a very specific way of putting it. She said I made it so effortless to leave that she never had to earn the right to stay. And she wasn't cruel when she said it. She was just right. And I've spent over a year worried that's just the shape of me, that I make myself so undemanding nobody ever has to fight to keep me. Which means I never actually get kept. Elisa didn't say anything right away, which I'd learned later was rare for her and therefore meant more than words would have. Then she reached over, slow, deliberate, not accidental this time, and put her hand over mine on the couch cushion, her thumb moving once, briefly, against my knuckles. "I'm not her," she said. "And I'm not interested in you being effortless to leave. I'm interested in you being impossible to leave, which is a completely different thing, and which, for what it's worth, you already are. I've been trying to leave this crush for 10 months. I'm bad at my job tonight. You're an excellent dentist. I'm an excellent dentist and apparently a terrible roommate because I just violated a rule I helped you enforce for 10 months. I violated it first, in the hallway, with my hands. That was an accident." "Was it?" I said again. And this time she smiled instead of arguing, small and real. "Can I tell you the part I haven't said yet?" she said, quieter now, her thumb still moving over my knuckles like she hadn't noticed she was doing it. "The reason it took me 10 months to say any of this, it's not just that you're my roommate. It's that every time I've wanted something before, I've wanted it loud, fast. I go all in and it burns out in 6 weeks, and I end up the one explaining to my mother why this one also didn't work. And what I feel about you isn't loud. It's just steady. Every single day, a little more, in a way that scared me more than any of the loud ones ever did. Because steady doesn't come with an exit built in. Steady means I'd actually have to lose something if I got this wrong. You're not going to get it wrong. You don't know that." "No," I agreed. "But I know I'd rather find out with you than keep being right about nothing, alone, on purpose, forever." It was somewhere around 1 in the morning, in the middle of some unremarkable errand, refilling water glasses because my brain apparently needed physical tasks to process what was happening, that I opened the cabinet above the sink and found, tucked behind 2 mugs we actually used, a third mug I hadn't touched in 14 months. Rachel's, chipped on the handle, a museum logo faded on the side. Never claimed because she'd left in a hurry and I'd never mailed it, because some part of me hadn't wanted the excuse to be finished. I stood there holding it longer than a mug requires. Elisa found me like that a minute later, and I watched her clock the specific quality of my silence, the way you clock a foundation crack you weren't expecting on an otherwise clean inspection. You okay? Found a fossil, I said, holding it up, aiming for light and landing somewhere closer to hollow. She didn't laugh, and she didn't ask the obvious questions either. She just waited, leaning in the kitchen doorway, one shoulder against the frame, exactly the way she does when she's deciding whether to stay in a room. Except this time, I understood the decision wasn't about the room. I keep thinking about what I said on the fire escape, I told her, setting the mug down carefully, like it might still break something if handled wrong. About being effortless to leave. I want to be honest with you, because you deserve that more than whatever charming thing I could say instead. I'm scared that's just a permanent setting. That I'll do the exact same thing with you. Be agreeable, be low maintenance, never make you work for anything. And one day you'll realize you never had to fight for me because I never gave you a reason to, and you'll leave the same way. And it'll be just as fair because I will have, once again, made it painless. That's not romantic, she said. But it's the most honest sentence you've said all night, so credit where it's due. I'm serious, Elisa. I know you are. That's why I'm not letting you turn it into a reason to close the listing before we've even had the open house. She crossed the kitchen, unhurried, took the mug out of my hands, and set it in the sink with a finality that felt intentional. Here's what I know. You didn't do anything wrong to Rachel. She left for a fellowship she wanted, and you supported her. And the fact that you didn't chain yourself to the doorframe isn't the same thing as not loving her. Some people are right for a season and wrong for the whole book. And that's not a character flaw in either of you. It's architecture. You said everything's architecture with me. This is architecture too. That's cheating. You're using my own metaphors against me. I'm a fast learner. It's why I'm good at my job. She was quiet a second, studying me with the same focus I imagine she gives an X-ray, looking for the thing that isn't obvious on the surface. Can I say one more thing? And then I'll stop being wise at 1 a.m, which is admittedly not a good look on anyone? Go ahead. You keep talking about this like it's a flaw you're confessing to, like you're doing me some kind of favor by warning me in advance. But I've watched you for 10 months, Jonas. You water a fern you've named on a schedule you set a reminder for. You called your mother back within an hour the one time she left a voicemail sounding upset, even though you complained about her constantly. You sat on this kitchen floor with me in February and didn't say one single thing for 40 minutes because you understood I didn't want words. That's not a man who makes himself effortless to love. That's a man who spent a long time being quietly, thoroughly good at it, and just happened to date someone who wanted a different kind of proof than the kind you were already giving. She reached up and tucked a piece of hair back from my forehead, her fingers brief and warm against my temple. I'm not asking you to prove you're impossible to leave, Jonas. I'm telling you I'm not planning on testing it. I moved in because of a crush I couldn't shake. I'm choosing to stay in this kitchen right now at 1 a.m, holding a mug that isn't mine, because I want to. Not because it's easy. That's the difference. Rachel's sentence was about you. Mine's about me. I want to tell you I had a clever comeback. What I had instead was the specific quiet devastation of being told the truth by someone who meant it. And the sudden, overwhelming clarity that I had been treating my own life like an as-is listing for over a year. And that she was the first person to walk through it and say she wanted to renovate, not walk away. Neither of us moved for a second after that. The kitchen quiet, except for the fridge humming back into its normal rhythm. Outside, the sky had gone from true black to something softer at the edges. That particular Navy Chicago gets right before dawn when the streetlights start looking slightly apologetic about still being on. I should be clear about something, I said. This isn't the blackout talking. I want you to know that, in case it looked like an emergency decision. I know it's not. I've wanted this since March. That's not adrenaline. That's just math I was bad at doing on purpose. She smiled at that, the real one, and closed the distance between us herself. Not seductive, not dramatic. Just steady. The specific bravery of someone walking toward a decision they'd already made and were simply following through on. Her hand found the front of my shirt, not pulling, just resting there, like she was checking it was real before committing further. For the record, she said, you don't have to say anything else devastating. I've already decided. When? Somewhere between the fern and the mug, I lost track. I kissed her then. Finally, the actual thing, not the several rehearsals my brain had been running unauthorized since roughly February. And it wasn't cinematic or perfect. It was warm and a little clumsy at first. Both of us adjusting, her hand curling into my shirt properly now. Mine finding her jaw with a care that surprised me. Thumb along her cheekbone the way I'd wanted to for longer than I'd admitted even to myself. She tasted like cheap wine and the last of the melted ice. And she made a small sound against my mouth that undid something structural in me. Some load-bearing wall I'd spent 14 months quietly reinforcing so nothing could get through it again. Her fingers found the back of my neck, right where the ice cube had been hours earlier. And I registered, somewhere in the part of my brain still capable of registering anything, that the whole night had been building toward exactly this specific point of contact. When we finally broke apart, she kept her forehead against mine for a second, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere instead of just standing in a kitchen. So, she said, the lease. I'm going to need to rewrite it. Extensively. There's a new rule, I said. Rule 1. No more pretending the fence is load-bearing. That's a terrible rule. I love it. Outside, the sky kept getting lighter, and somewhere below us, the city was starting its normal morning noise, and neither of us moved to close the blinds, because for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, I didn't feel any particular urge to make anything about myself easy to walk away from. 6 months later, our lease has both our names on it in a place where it used to just have mine, which Elisa still describes as the least romantic wedding she never had. A line she trots out specifically to watch me pretend to be offended. The power's gone out twice since that July night, both times in far less dramatic weather. And both times we've ended up on the same fire escape out of what I can only call architectural loyalty to the scene of the crime. Steve the Fern is, against all botanical odds, still alive, largely because Elisa took over his care after determining my watering schedule was, in her professional opinion, criminally negligent. She's added 2 more plants since, neither named, both thriving out of what I choose to interpret as spite. She still makes emergency spaghetti on nights when something's gone wrong and she doesn't want to talk about it yet. And I've learned to just start boiling water when I see her face. No questions asked, which she's told me more than once, is the single most romantic thing anyone's ever done for her. A sentence that continues to seem insane to me for pasta. She still dances badly doing dishes. She still loses pens at a rate that borders on supernatural. She still stands in doorways for a beat before committing to a room, except now, more often than not, I'm already in whatever room she's deciding about. And the pause has gotten shorter every month, like she's slowly running out of reasons to double-check. I used the laser measurer on this apartment for the first time in April. The same battered tool I've carried into 100 other people's homes for 6 years, and somehow never once pointed at my own walls. To hang a shelf in the hallway for her dental school diploma, which she'd kept in a closet for 2 years because, in her words, it felt weird to make it permanent. I measured twice. I always measured twice. It felt, that afternoon, less like work and more like finally doing to my own life what I'd spent a career doing for strangers. Deciding a space was worth the commitment of actually moving in. I think about Rachel sometimes, without the ache it used to come with. She's doing well in Marfa. From what I hear through the small number of mutual friends who still update me on things I no longer need updating on. I don't think she was wrong about me back then. I think she was right about a version of me that hasn't fully existed since a blackout in July, since a hallway, since an arm I grabbed by accident and never fully let go of. She wasn't the wrong person because she did something wrong. She was the right person for a stretch of years that ended cleanly the way some things are allowed to end, without anybody owing an apology for it. I don't think love gives you ownership over everyone you've stopped valuing. And I don't think it ever did. Not over her, not over the years, not over who I used to be before I learned how to stay somewhere on purpose. Letting go of that was its own kind of renovation. Elisa still keeps the stress ball molar on her desk. She squeezed it once, in March. When I asked her, badly over a stack of dishes, no ring, no plan. Just a sentence that had been sitting in my chest for weeks, demanding release. If she'd ever consider making the lease permanent, in the other sense of the word. She didn't answer right away. She finished the dish she was washing, dried her hands with theatrical slowness clearly designed to torture me, and then said, "I already decided that back in July, Jonas. I've just been waiting for you to catch up, which is, I've come to accept, the most accurate single sentence anyone has ever said about me. I think about that blackout more than is probably normal for a man who now has central air. I think about how close I came to spending that entire night being careful, measuring the distance, reading the room, doing what I always do, making myself easy enough to not have to find out what would happen if I stayed in it instead. What would you have done? Standing in that hallway in the dark, with someone's arm in your hand and 11 minutes to decide whether an accident was actually an invitation? And have you ever caught yourself making it effortless for someone to walk away from you long before they ever tried? Measuring the exits before you'd even let yourself want to stay?